Batman Arkham is a beloved video game franchise by Rocksteady Studios and WB Games, known for combining incredible stories with addictive gameplay and a beautiful open world. A once no-name studio has made a name for itself and has influenced open-world video game design ever since. This documentary will dig deeper into the development of Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, Arkham Origins, and Arkham Knight. We will investigate and find out what it takes to consistently make amazing video games. My name is Troy Harrison Chriest, and this is Batman Arkham Rises.
Welcome to the madhouse, Batman!
To see how a no-name developer like Rocksteady Studios rises to video game icons, we have to go back to a simpler time, 2007. Classic video game publisher Eidos Interactive, known for projects like Deus Ex, gained the rights to make a Batman game from Warner Brothers in the spring of 2007. Eidos approached British developers Rocksteady Studios after seeing a prototype that they had made for a Batman physics engine demo. This early build had extremely detailed cape animations that would sway in the wind and move with Batman. This build won over DC Comics and Eidos Interactive. With Rocksteady signing on as the dev team for an unannounced Batman game, DC needed a writer that could adapt a comic book story arc into a 3D open world. Instead of picking someone that only wrote Batman comics, DC went after the man that wrote the best 90s show of all time, Batman the Animated Series, and his name was Paul Dini. Mr. Dini is responsible for creating the character Harley Quinn and also shaping the Mr. Freeze origin that we all know today. DC found a writer that could bring the dark tone of Batman Beyond, Return of the Joker, to a AAA video game.
I will find you, rip your flesh like paper.
Before Paul Dini came on board as writer, the team at Rocksteady knew they wanted to set this game in the sprawling open island of Arkham Asylum. Early designs show Rocksteady altering the classic comic book look of Arkham Asylum by spreading out the manor into different buildings around Arkham Island. Although being a pretty big game for the time, Rocksteady closed up a lot of the areas and made it so Batman could not get help from his long list of allies. It also let Rocksteady focus on the antagonists that they had been planning from the beginning.
Ta-da! Honey, I'm home.
Come on in.
Besides the setting, Rocksteady knew they wanted Arkham Asylum to focus heavily on the Joker, locking Batman in the insane asylum with the rest of his enemies. With a very mature story forming, Rocksteady had to find quality voice actors to bring these characters to life. This led to the obvious casting of Kevin Conroy as Batman.
You okay? He surrendered almost without a fight. I don't like it.
And Mark Hamill as the Joker. Yes, Luke Skywalker has been the Joker for 20 years, if you didn't know that yet. With Paul Dini writing, many of the actors were pulled directly from the animated series like Conroy and Hamill, but also Arlene Sorkin, the original voice of Harley Quinn. Besides the voice talent that 90s kids will have nostalgic memories hearing, the team didn't want the game to have a cartoony tone, instead pulling inspiration from Grant Morrison's graphic novel, Arkham Asylum, a serious house on serious Earth.
Oh, it's always nice to return to my sweet little hacienda.
Scan initializing.
You know what? I prefer the good old cavity search. Much more personal.
Besides comic book homage, the game's atmosphere and narrative arcs were heavily influenced by BioShock, according to producer Nathan Berlow. This spooky atmosphere carried over into the voice acting as well. After Mark Hamill saw the 3D model of the Joker that Rocksteady had created, he knew that he had to play a more menacing and evil Joker than the sometimes light-hearted Joker he was known for in the animated series.
Need to take my temperature? I'd be happy to drop my pants.
Also, with Arlene Sorkin returning to play Harley Quinn, we once again get to hear that classic 90s voice that everyone from Tara Strong to Margot Robbie have tried to duplicate ever since.
When Mr. J kills Batman, we're gonna get married. It's gonna be so cool.
Batman's design is also very unique to the Arkham games, pulling inspiration from Batman the Long Halloween, seen with the long pointy ears and flowing cape. They also didn't want Batman to have an insane amount of armor, instead using cloth in the Batsuit to make it seem like Batman is overconfident. He doesn't need armor, or at least he doesn't think so. To make Batman match the overpowering and very mature voice of Kevin Conroy, they designed Bruce Wayne as a massive man, going for an older, wiser Batman.
What? Don't you trust me?
This was the perfect choice. When you play Batman Arkham, you don't hear someone trying to do a Batman voice, you just hear Batman. Kevin Conroy is what I hear in my head when I read a Batman comic book. And the Arkham games maybe would not have done so well if they cast somebody else as the Dark Knight. I know I'm going on and on about the voice acting, but these games would have fallen apart without these voice actors. They allowed for amazing storytelling due to 100% immersion. Tremendous writing and acting led to one of the best narrative experiences in video game history. But that's enough about the cast, let's talk about development.
You took longer than I thought.
In 2007, consoles were not very powerful, so Rocksteady had to come up with a design for a Batman game that would not only satisfy fans, but be able to run on outdated hardware. This is one of the reasons Rocksteady landed on Arkham Asylum, because it allowed them to tell a good Batman story without having to design an entire living, breathing Gotham City. The gameplay dropped Batman into the asylum with just his detective skills and an assortment of gadgets to solve mysteries, beat up thugs, and most importantly, catch the Joker and stop him from blowing up Gotham City.
Oracle, go through the city's computers. Pull up all you can find on Dr. Young. I'll go through anything you find once I get to the cave.
A bat cave on Arkham Island?
I built it years ago. It's best to plan ahead for situations like this.
How'd you manage to keep this a secret?
It's me, remember?
So do you think Dr. Young's been experimenting with venom? The same chemical that turns Bane into that animal?
Yes, I'm worried. Bane seemed even more powerful than usual. Joker wants the venom, and that can only be trouble. I'm heading to Dead Man's Point in Arkham North.
This
I'll
was a
contact you once I'm in the
streamlined,
back.
linear story that had open world elements like collectible Riddler trophies and the occasional random mob of thugs to beat up. Besides that, side quests were practically non-existent, focusing heavily on the Joker throughout the asylum and then dealing with bosses like Bane and Poison Ivy. In total, Batman Arkham Asylum was a very quick game, taking around 10 to 15 hours to beat, depending on how many mysteries and collectibles you looked for. Development began around 2007 and ended in 2009, taking in total 21 months to make the entire game. This was a very quick development cycle, considering that Rocksteady only started with 40 people and then later growing to 60 by the end of Arkham Asylum's completion. Compared to companies who can't make a good single-player game like EA, who have hundreds if not thousands of employees, Rocksteady pumped out an extremely high, polished, narrative-driven action-adventure game in 21 months, and that is just incredible for a brand new studio like Rocksteady. Apparently, the most difficult part to figure out was combat, which is crazy to think about today because that is the main thing the Batman games are known for. Extremely addicting and always fun combat. Rocksteady originally planned to have the combat as a rhythm-based hitbox system, later to be changed into a strange 2D combat mode, similar to what we know the Scarecrow hallucinations to be like.
You're in my world now.
Then they were all later scrapped for the third-person punch, roll, parry system we are all too familiar with in action-adventure games today. Once they nailed down the system, Rocksteady had one of the most addicting chain combat systems for its time. Fighting was not the only difficult part of development. It apparently took one of the animators 2 years to get the flow of Batman's cape just right. In total, about 700 animations and sound effects combined into what we now know today as Batman's cape. Besides great combat and an exciting world to explore, what most people remember Batman Arkham Asylum for is the story.
Do not let him out of your sight.
There'll be time enough for you later, Cash. Speaking of time, tick-tock, tick-tock. talk. Is that a crocodile I hear? What's up, Doc? Pencil me in for tomorrow at 4. We've got a lot of catching up to do.
Keep behind me.
The plot of Arkham Asylum follows the Joker and his scheme to destroy Gotham City, while Batman is locked in Arkham Asylum with his worst enemies. This leaving Batman to beat up thugs, find clues, and eventually lead him to the Joker's supply of Bane Venom, or as Rocksteady calls it in Arkham, Titan. Joker uses this substance to transform into a super powerful Juggernaut version of himself, making it very difficult for Batman to defeat him and stop the explosions in Gotham.
What a blabbermouth! Spoiling the surprise!
Be quiet.
Oh, am I getting to you? Am I? Good.
Joker also applies the Titan formula to countless thugs throughout the game, providing enemies that actually pose a real threat to Batman. Besides the Joker storyline, Arkham Asylum had Batman face off against many of his worst enemies.
Croco boy! Is that you?
Get ready. Keep your weapons trained on it at all times.
Looks angry.
What's it doing?
I've got your scent, Batman. I will hunt you down.
Get that animal under control!
A toy collar won't stop me from killing you, Batman. I'll rip you apart, eat your bones.
Boss fights included Killer Croc, Poison Ivy, Bane, and of course, the Scarecrow hallucination sequences. Arkham Asylum had a ton of enemies to fight through, but many of Batman's rogues gallery were actually cut due to their motivations as a character not lining up with the Joker's plot. Unlike the Riddler and the Joker, Mr. Freeze doesn't care about being better at life than Batman. His motivations in the Diniverse are solely based on his wife and revenge against Wayne Enterprises, not Batman. Paul Dini didn't think Mr. Freeze would care about the Joker's plot to mess with Batman's night for 10 hours, so he was scrapped and saved for Batman Arkham City. Another villain that was scrapped from Arkham Asylum only to be saved for Arkham City is the Mad Hatter. Planned to be featured in an underground forest maze created by Poison Ivy, at the center would be the Mad Hatter having a tea party ready for Batman. This being cut because it did not fit the game's overall dark tone. Although Poison Ivy was used in Asylum as one of the best boss fights in the series' history, Mad Hatter was saved for some creepy side missions in Batman Arkham City. Other than villains, gameplay mechanics like driving the Batmobile never made it into Batman Arkham Asylum, due to it being very expensive to devote assets and time to design random driving portions that wouldn't end up actually adding anything to the story. Rocksteady didn't want to waste the already designed 90s animated theme Batmobile, so the remnants of this idea got shifted and are seen in the mission where Batman must defend the place where he parked the Batmobile, only then leading him to Commissioner Gordon's location after he finds his pipe. An immersive story and addicting gameplay led to some of the best white-knuckle moments in video game history. But gameplay and story aside, what really stands out to me is the design.
Look at all this new security. How's the guy supposed to break out of here?
Batman's character design was mostly influenced by the art of Jim Lee, this being seen in the large amount of gray they used in the Batsuit. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the Long Halloween was also a big inspiration. Also, the way Batman is depicted as a massive hulking figure that you would not want to meet in a dark alley reminds me a lot of Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, except the ears, of course, look a lot like The Long Halloween, straight out of Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's The Long Halloween. The Joker looks very similar to the Killing Joke. You can see this with the crazed face and long skinny stature.
Whee! Great night for a party!
Not where you're going.
The night is young, Vance. I still have a trick or two up my sleeve. I mean, don't you think it's a little bit funny how a fire at Blackgate caused hundreds of my crew to be moved here?
Although the person who received the biggest overhaul is Harley Quinn, who looks like she robbed a nurse at Arkham Asylum and forgot to button up the shirt she stole. Another element of this game that differs greatly from comic book counterparts is Arkham Asylum itself. Rocksteady used classic Gothic imagery synonymous with Gotham architecture. But instead of doing the classic Arkham Manor converted into the Insane Asylum, they decided to spread out the different parts of the asylum and created Arkham Island. This allowed Rocksteady to spread out the gameplay to different environments around the island, creating 40 rooms, 3 exterior areas, 3 Scarecrow hallucinations, and 34 corridors in total, each area having a significantly different design theme to match the villain that Batman would be facing. For example, the medical building features Victorian-style metalwork designed to make the player feel claustrophobic and terrified of the Joker-controlled insane asylum.
At least he's back where he belongs. Get up! Now!
Joker's loose. Alert the warden.
Hurry! We're losing him,
The joke's on you.
In comparison, the Arkham Mansion shows a classic Gotham style used to incite the history and longevity of the Arkham family. The workflow of the design followed behind the gameplay team. First, developers would plan out the game mechanics and movement in a blank level. Then, the art team would begin designing layouts and find the tone of each environment. Then finally, the 3D team would come in, model assets, and use any textures that the art team had created and establish a working, playable world for Batman to play around in. The last step, of course, was post-processing, which for the uninformed is all the stuff that makes a game look pretty. Ambient occlusion to make the lighting on 3D objects realistic, anti-aliasing to improve pixelation on jaggy surfaces, and then finally, the lighting team comes in and adds the lens flares and realistic shadows to give the game a cinematic look. To get both a comic book feel and a realistic rendered 3D environment, Rocksteady had to decide how they wanted their game to look. Deciding to find a middle ground between cartoon and realistic, they went for overly saturated lighting and very bright colors to get the comic book tone, but then modeled and textured everything very dark and realistic with a monochromatic color scheme, combining the pretty colors of the comics with the ultra realism that we saw in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. The lighting, however, wasn't just for show. It added a way for Rocksteady to guide Batman down an otherwise dark and boring hallway. Do you remember constant TVs with the Joker's face on them? They were basically Rocksteady's way of saying, yeah, you're going the right way. 2007 was a long time ago, but Rocksteady's Arkham Asylum still looks great today because of amazing design choices early on from Rocksteady Studios. However, the one part of Asylum that doesn't hold up today is the cutscenes. Back in 2007, cutscenes needed to run in 720p 30 FPS, and they didn't have the technology to render cutscenes natively in the engine. So today, let's say you're playing Arkham Asylum on PC in 4K 60 FPS, the game will scale and look great, but those cutscenes will still be locked to that 720p resolution, a problem Rocksteady would eventually fix in later games. Even with the resolution and frame rate problems, it is impossible to skip Arkham Asylum's cutscenes due to tremendous camera work and a story that was constantly being moved forward throughout those cutscenes.
Long night, Jim.
Joker invades City Hall and holds the mayor hostage, leaving it to me to juggle SWAT teams, the media, and you. Yeah, it's been a hell of a night.
Hopefully the last one we'll ever have with him.
Yeah, right.
The story is the main reason many people around the world replay this game every year. Before Arkham Asylum was ever released, Rocksteady Studios knew they had a great game, and a story too good to not continue into another chapter. This is why 7 months before the end of Batman Arkham Asylum's development, Paul Dini began writing the ambitious sequel, Batman Arkham City. But before we get into the next game, I have to talk about the incredible success that Batman Arkham Asylum was released to. Rocksteady's Batman Arkham Asylum was released for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 on August 25th, 2009, with a delayed PC release on September 15th, 2009. Arkham Asylum won so many Game of the Year awards that it held the Guinness Book of World Records for the most critically acclaimed superhero game of all time, only to be passed by its successor in 2011. After Batman Arkham Asylum had sold 2 million copies in the first 3 weeks, DC decided to greenlight the sequel that Paul Dini had been writing for months. DC and Rocksteady began planning one of my favorite games of all time. But we will talk about that in part 2 of Batman Arkham Rises. To see how Rocksteady Studios became video game legends, we first have to take a look at their most critically acclaimed game of all time. This documentary will dig deeper into the design and development of Batman Arkham City. If you missed part 1 where I covered Arkham Asylum's development, the link will be in the description below. My name is Troy Harrison Chriest, and this is part 2 of my 4K documentary Batman Arkham Rises. Thank you all for watching. Please leave a like. Pre-production began on Arkham City a few months before its predecessor, Arkham Asylum, was ever released. Warner Brothers and Rocksteady were so confident before releasing their first game that lead writer Paul Dini and Rocksteady Studios began planning the sequel, Arkham City. Arguably the best superhero game of all time, if not one of the best open world games ever. Also, DC got Mark Hamill to return as the Joker and Kevin Conroy to play Bruce Wayne once again. This gave Paul Dini the time to make the most detailed and character-driven narrative experience possible, and it allowed the two games to have a connecting story arc. This would also be his last time writing an Arkham game, and effectively when DC Comics and Rocksteady start to cut their ties with the Diniverse first established in Batman the Animated Series. Since they started pre-production so early, Rocksteady had time to put concept art for Arkham City in their first Batman game, Arkham Asylum. They hid the plans so deep in the Asylum that after 6 months, Rocksteady eventually had to tell everybody where it was. The goal of this sequel was to put Batman in an open city environment that dwarfed the previous game in size, but also they wanted to maintain the classic Gothic style and the level of detail that they were known for. They wanted to achieve that Batman saving Gotham tone similar to the Dark Knight films, without having to make an entire city. Gotham in comics and films are often depicted like a mix of Pittsburgh and New York City, with different boroughs being separated and connected by bridges. This made it easy for Rocksteady to close off access to other parts of Gotham and to justify that it wasn't all of the city, it was Arkham City. Instead, they combined classic locations like Ace Chemicals and the Sienna Steel Mill into Rocksteady's version of an Arkham super prison. In comics, this area is known as Old Gotham or Old Town, and that tone is seen in the dirty Gothic-style architecture around Arkham City. The environment was a big inspiration for how Batman would travel. Members of Rocksteady and most of the gaming community thought it was strange how often Batman was getting from place to place by running in Arkham Asylum. In movies and comics, Batman either uses the Batmobile or glides with his wings and his grapple. They ended up deciding on gliding as the main form of transportation. Adjusting to this new design choice, the team had to make the world adapt to the grapple and Batman's wings. They did this by cramming the structures together and making often narrow streets, and most importantly, made very tall buildings at very different heights so the Dark Knight can take advantage of the verticality. Once again, the Batmobile was planned but eventually cut because the team did not think it would fit into their half-skinny and half-flooded streets. The world would have had to be redesigned to fit a car. Rocksteady said that it might feel like a completely different game if they added the Batmobile, and it did when they eventually did it in Arkham Knight in 2015. Other new features included an extensive list of side quests new to the series, and my favorite new feature, playing as someone else than Batman. Not only was Batman locked in Arkham City, but so was Catwoman. Rocksteady made this incredible decision to have the infamous cat burglar be playable. She was voiced by the tremendous Grey DeLisle. Her motives and storylines differ from Batman's at the start of the game. Catwoman is in Arkham for the loot, not here to stop Strange. Many fans were surprised when they first started Arkham City. They opened a game with Batman in the title, only to be playing as Catwoman in the first minutes. It begins with Catwoman trying to rob a safe that Two-Face has been guarding. Then she is captured and tried at the courthouse by Harvey Dent, leaving Batman to stop Two-Face and rescue Catwoman. Rocksteady didn't want her to just be a side note in the game, so they really went out of their way to make Selina Kyle a very important part of the story. One notable mission has Selina sneaking into the Arkham Vault to steal back her belongings from Hugo Strange. Why this mission stands out is because after Miss Kyle gets her gear back, she sees on the security TV that Batman is knocked out and needs her help. Rocksteady then gives us the most ridiculous option in video game history: go left and save Batman, or go right and leave Arkham City. If you thought this meant Catwoman would leave Arkham and then it would go back to Batman, nope, Batman died, Catwoman's gone, and the credits roll, way before the game is supposed to end. To me, this was just hilarious. How many people actually tried that and then instantly ran and unplugged their Xbox? When restarting, you would thankfully be back before that decision. That was a really scary moment because Arkham City auto-saved. If you went through those credits, you would not be able to go back and complete what you missed out on. But if you rage quitted, you were fine and you could go back and redo that choice. Her missions were always interesting and challenging, and having her voiceover added a nice comical tone to a sometimes gloomy game. Although Selina's wisecracks were funny, her combat was no laughing matter. To vary her fighting style from The Dark Knight, Rocksteady tailored Catwoman's combat to be fast-paced and brutal, focusing on kicks, slashes, and her always deadly whip. While stalking around, Catwoman's takedowns and sneak attacks somehow managed to be sexy and scary. If I ever get choked out, I hope it's by Catwoman, and many guards will say lines very similar to that. Batman Arkham City maybe should have been called Catwoman Arkham City because the writing and gameplay for her was always amazing. Robin was also planned to be a playable character, but was mostly cut from the story. He only appears in the combat challenge mode and to drop off the line launcher so Batman can get into Wonder City and get a sample of Ra's al Ghul's blood later in the game. After Hugo Strange learns Batman's secret identity, Bruce Wayne is locked in Arkham City, a subsection of Gotham that has been converted into a large open-world prison by Hugo Strange and funded by Ra's al Ghul. This place houses every inmate in Gotham and many supervillains. In one night, Batman must use his fists, his detective skills, and many gadgets to stop Hugo Strange from commencing Protocol 10. This allowed for constant tension throughout the questline because of the threat that Protocol 10 would blow up everybody in Arkham City, including Bruce Wayne. Hugo Strange is a very intimidating villain because of his overwhelming control of Arkham City and most of its guards. He contrasts very well to the first game, leaving the Joker-controlled madhouse to a dark and dystopian prison in security lockdown. Dr. Hugo Strange believes if all of the criminals in Gotham are destroyed, the city will no longer need the Batman. In Hugo's mind, he is the next protector of Gotham. That was his motivation for locking Batman in Arkham City instead of just alerting the public that Mr. Wayne is the Dark Knight. Other than the overarching Protocol 10 storyline, Batman Arkham City features a plethora of Rogues Gallery villains. Enemies include Penguin, Harley Quinn, Ra's al Ghul, Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, Two-Face, the Mad Hatter, Solomon Grundy, Bane, the Riddler, Deadshot, Hush, Clayface, and of course, the Joker. Even with the new environment and many new villains to beat up, Arkham City is still a direct sequel to Arkham Asylum, and many plot points were continued into the storyline. Most notably, the Joker is still dealing with the side effects of Titan, the formula he used to transform into a Bane-like version of himself in the last game. Joker is sick, and the leftover Titan in his bloodstream is slowly killing him and decaying his already terrible skin. This means Mr. J is even more unpredictable than before, because he will stop at nothing to get a cure for his disease. Joker knows the one man that will help him is Batman. So Joker, Harley, and Clayface plot the old fake Joker gag to distract Batman and poison him.
Surprise!
While Batman is inspecting the Clayface Joker, which he still does not know is Clayface, the real Joker pops out and stabs Batman with a vial of his blood, infecting Batman and giving them both hours to live. When Batman explains that he's fine if they both die tonight, Joker informs him that he has been sending his blood to every hospital in Gotham.
There's nothing wrong with you.
Nice of you to say, but you of all people should know there's plenty wrong with me. Take my blood, for example. I wish somebody would. This stuff is killing me.
Why should I care?
Because now there's a teeny little bit of me in you too, Bats. Oh, come on. Don't tell me it's not what you always wanted. Look, we're running out of time. I need your help. I nearly had a cure. It was so close, and then it was taken from me.
So we both die. I'm fine with that.
Are you? Imagine sucking down that last breath knowing that Gotham is doing the same.
What are you talking about?
Oh, didn't I say? I've spent weeks shipping samples of my blood to emergency rooms all over the city.
So that's Protocol 10. Poison Gotham. I expected more.
Protocol 10? Never heard of it. Hold tight. I'll be in touch!
Leaving Batman no choice but to track down Mr. Freeze so he can make a cure. This, however, is no easy task. After tracking the coldest place in Arkham City to be the old Gotham City Police Department, Batman realizes that Freeze has been captured by the Penguin and is being held inside the Iceberg Lounge inside the Gotham Museum. While all of this is happening, Batman has started to feel the symptoms of the Joker blood, trying to balance hallucinations and his probable death with all of the countless supervillains trying their best to ruin Batman's night. Here's all the craziness going on. Victor Zsasz has hostages and will not stop calling you on payphones. Riddler is Riddler, and being annoying, he's placing difficult challenges for Batman to complete. The Mad Hatter kidnaps you, Deadshot is just sniping people for fun, Ivy is pissed at Catwoman, Azrael is stalking Batman, the Calendar Man tells Batman he's lonely in February, rude, Bane is pissed at Joker for using him to make Titan, Ra's al Ghul has too many ninjas, and did I mention Hush is running around Arkham City, cutting people's faces off for parts so he can look like Bruce Wayne. Great. All of this while Batman and the Joker are slowly dying together. It is insane the amount of content that Rocksteady packed into Arkham City while still balancing an incredible main storyline perfectly. Don't worry, I'm not going to run down every single plotline, but I will talk about the perfect ending later in the documentary. Besides revolutionizing video game storytelling with Batman Arkham City, Rocksteady perfected the franchise's gameplay and would become the gold standard for future open-world games like The Lord of the Rings Shadow of Mordor and inspiring the later Assassin's Creeds. Rocksteady already had an amazing combat system, so there was no reason to alter it. They just made it better. Fighting thugs in this game could often lead to 60+ hit combos and epic combat takedowns. They also added a couple of different enemy types to shake up the gameplay. Not only were there guards with guns, but constant people with ninja swords, clayface zombies, enemies with shields, bats, clubs, and all sorts of a variety of weapons that actually made the player think about what combo would work perfectly for that specific encounter. Also, new Bat gadgets were a big priority. Besides the classics like the Bat Claw, Batarang, and Explosive Gel, they also added an assortment of new gadgets for Batman to solve problems with. Toys for him included the Sonic Batarang, which makes a small explosion when it hits. They added the Reverse Batarang, which does exactly what you think it does. Turns around and hits somebody in the back. The Disruptor was added to shut off weapons. The Remote Electrical Charge was a shotgun used to stun enemies and open electrically powered doors. The Freeze Blast and Freeze Cluster Grenades let you make ice to land on water with or throw at someone. Another one is the Line Launcher, so Batman can get over a tough environment. And finally, the Mine Detector, which is very useful later in the game when mines are everywhere. With all of these new gadgets for Batman to play around with, the team had to figure out how to use them all in close quarters combat. So they made a list of key combinations to quickfire the massive list of items. This made combat twice as fun as Arkham Asylum because of the ridiculous amount of combos Batman could beat up thugs with. Fast-paced fighting was the bread and butter of the series, but what made Arkham City sell so many copies was people talking to their friends about the amazing ending. I won't spoil the entire game, but I do have to talk about the ending of Batman Arkham City because it is very important to the rest of this documentary. If you have not beaten this game and you do not want it spoiled, 1. Pause the video and please watch the rest of it later. 2. Go home and rethink your life. Why have you not played this yet? Wait, you're probably already home, but still, rethink your life. Number 3, go play Arkham City. Now that that is out of the way, let's talk about one of the best endings in video game history. Batman gets the blood of the demon from Ra's al Ghul because it has regenerative properties, perfect for a cure. Mr. Freeze turns that into an antidote for Batman, the Joker, and the infected people of Gotham City. While Batman and Mr. Freeze are fighting about finding Victor's wife, Nora, Harley Quinn steals the cure. Anyways, long story short, Hugo Strange's plot to blow up Arkham City, Protocol 10, was stopped by Batman. And the big plot twist was that Arkham City was funded by Ra's al Ghul. After beating up Hugo Strange and Ra's al Ghul, Batman has to find the Joker, who still has the cure. When Batman arrives, the Joker appears to be healthy, but then reveals himself as Clayface. He had been pretending to be a healthy Joker all this time, so the real Joker can get into position and shoot Batman's favorite lady with back dimples, Talia al Ghul, the daughter of the demon. Then after a surprisingly easy final boss fight with Clayface, Bruce retrieves the cure. The Joker then stabs Batman for it, making him drop the vial.
Every decision you've ever made ends with death and misery. People die. I stop you. You'll just break out and do it again.
Think of it as a running gag! No!
Batman had already drinking some of the antidote, but the Joker did not. Batman would have saved him, which is the saddest part of this story.
Are you happy now?
Do you want to know something funny? Even after everything you've done, I would have saved you.
That actually is pretty funny.
The Joker is dead, legitimately dead. Batman sends his blood to the people of Gotham, then carries the Joker out of Arkham City. He lays the Joker on a GCPD cop car and then vanishes, while Jim Gordon begs Batman to tell him what happened. Batman is destroyed that he let the Joker die right in front of him. The end. Credits. People were amazed. They had no idea what just happened and did not believe that the Joker was actually dead. This ending left millions stunned and waiting for a sequel. Reviews were raving, a tremendous game with an ending that none of us saw coming. Arkham City was flying off the shelves when it was finally released on October 18th of 2011. All in all, Arkham City took about 2 years to finish, and Rocksteady grew from around 70 to 100 employees by the time the game was done. Paul Dini's writing and Rocksteady's hard work paid off. Arkham City was a massive success, and to this day it is one of the fastest selling video games of all time. Selling 2 million copies in the first week of launch, Arkham City passed Asylum in gaming awards as the most critically acclaimed superhero game of all time, even launching a Game of the Year edition later on, as well as Wii and iOS spin-offs that are barely worth mentioning. And I'm not going to even name them, because they were bad. This success spawned multiple DLCs like the Nightwing Pack, which added Dick Grayson to the competitive combat mode. Then we also got Harley Quinn's Revenge, which followed Batman looking for Quinn 2 weeks after the Joker's death. Paul Dini did not write any of this content. Fans were hooked and couldn't wait for another Rocksteady game. Instead of rushing out with a sequel, Rocksteady made a move that nobody expected. They hired WB Games Montreal to make Batman Arkham Origins, a prequel to the Rocksteady games. Most were not happy and were very confused why the Golden Boys of Arkham were not making the next Batman game. This happened because Rocksteady had big plans for the sequel and needed more time to make it. While the world was gearing up to play WB's Arkham Origins, the team at Rocksteady began working on their next open-world game, Batman Arkham Knight. But before we get into Rocksteady's finale, we are going to talk about the development of the worst-received game in the franchise history in Part 3 of my 4K documentary, Batman Arkham Rises. Batman Arkham Origins is the odd man out for the franchise. Some loved it, most didn't. Welcome to Part 3 of my 4K documentary, Batman Arkham Rises. Today we will learn about the design and development of the worst received game in the series. Thank you all for watching, please subscribe. Origins is the first to not be made by Rocksteady and was not written by Paul Dini. Instead being developed by WB Games Montreal, and the story was created by the group of writers Corey May, Ryan Gaeta, and Duma Wenshu. I personally believe this is the worst Arkham game in the franchise based off of the boring storyline and often repetitive gameplay. If you played any of the other Arkham games, you know which characters are going to die, and it makes the story arcs severely lack suspense. It also has a big voice acting dilemma. With Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill working with Rocksteady on Arkham Knight, they simply did not have time to work on both games. Origins has a big immersion problem because of this. The fans were used to Conroy and Hamill as Batman and the Joker, only to be replaced with younger actors. Troy Baker's Joker voice was not bad at all, but something just sounds off. It didn't sound like the Joker was talking. It felt closer to a Mark Hamill impersonation instead of his own version.
Here, have a laugh on me! You hear that? Sounds like 8 tiny reindeer!
As for Batman, they tried to get a less mature sounding voice, as it is a prequel, and hired Roger Craig Smith. To me, his version of Batman doesn't sound like a young Kevin Conroy. Instead, it sounds like the voice director just told him to talk as low as he could. His voice is inconsistent, much like my own. Some moments while he is talking as Batman will give you goosebumps.
I'm not playing games, Slade.
But when he is using his higher-pitched Bruce Wayne voice, it is nowhere near what we are used to in the cartoons and video games. If you have never played an Arkham game and Origins was the first one you tried, you might not have an issue with his voice. But for those of us who played the previous games and watched Batman the Animated Series in the 90s, it just sounds strange. Besides the two most important characters being a disappointment compared to Asylum and City, the supporting cast totally picks up the slack. Nolan North, famous for playing Nathan Drake in the Uncharted games as well as Dr. Richtofen in Call of Duty Zombies, once again plays the Penguin and does an incredible job of transforming his voice. Think about how different those three characters sound: an American action hero, a crazy German scientist, and cranky old British cobblepot. In my opinion, he's one of the most talented voice actors ever, simply because of his variety of voices.
Hold on a bloody minute! I seen your act! I ain't done nothing you not done! Black Mask, put a bounty on my head. Where is he? I don't keep tabs on every geezer with a grudge. You're not a popular bloke in this town. You're running out of time. Wait. Lacey Towers. There was a murder. It was supposed to be his same house. Or Black Mask. He's got problems of his own, I'd say. Someone broke in there.
Thankfully, the side characters held their own because the main two simply were not up to par. With my gripes about the voice acting out of the way, Arkham Origins is a pretty fun experience, mostly because of the interesting setting and timeline, not because of the story. Arkham Origins was inspired by Frank Miller's Year One as well as The Man Who Laughs and a bit of The Killing Joke. This was the first Batman game to be set in actual Gotham City. Although the map is basically the same as Arkham City, it does have another area to explore connected by the massive bridge. It is Christmas Eve in Gotham. Bells are ringing, lights are gleaming, and Black Mask has hired 8 assassins to find and kill the Batman. Great. It takes place 7 years before the events of Arkham Asylum. It starts off with Batman trying to stop a jailbreak at Blackgate Prison. This game attempts to have a more comic book vibe to their storyline with non-stop villains popping in and out, but it ultimately fails to achieve this without a good connecting story. Batman Arkham Asylum and Arkham City feel like you are playing through a comic book because it was written by a masterful comic and television writer, Paul Dini. Arkham Origins feels like a video game about a comic book. This is mostly because of bad choices in development. WB Montreal started working on the prequel to Asylum in 2012. The game was then later announced on April 9th, 2013. The creators of the franchise, Rocksteady Studios, needed extra time to make Batman Arkham Knight because they were shifting from the Unreal 3 engine to Unreal 4. However, WB did not make the same transition for Arkham Origins. Instead, they used Rocksteady's outdated, modified Unreal 3 engine previously used on Arkham City. UE3 once ruled the 2000s as engine of choice for many developers, but during the shift to newer hardware on the consoles and PC, it really started to show its age. And this was a big issue for anybody playing on Steam. To this day, on modern hardware, 2 GTX 1070s for example, the game stutters constantly and only has a smooth frame rate while indoors. When gliding around Gotham, expect anywhere from 60 to 4 on the frame rate. I think the awful performance was caused by a rushed release window and a focus on the console builds over the PC, and it shows. Another strange development choice that WB Montreal made was continuing the support of PhysX. This is a NVIDIA-built particle system that basically renders the movement of leaves, snowflakes, and dirt based off of wind and colliding particles. That is basically a fancy way of saying have terrible performance for the sake of particles. They sort of fell into that strange thing NVIDIA does, where they push these new technologies onto devs that are really not designed for current or even near future hardware. After getting these devs like Rocksteady or CD Projekt Red to sign off on some strange feature like individual hair physics, they then do not help the team actually optimize it as much as they should, leaving us with often broken settings. This completely happened in Arkham Origins. It's very odd because it was completely built around this switch to DX11 while still maintaining a DirectX 9 option. This must have made for some very angry programmers because they had to design a PC port that would basically need separate drivers depending on what shadow options you decided to pick. This is why when you change certain settings in various games, it will ask you to restart before they can be applied. The PC is trying to find the best DX driver. That's what it's doing. Anyways, I had to mention the performance during this section because it is a major issue and it could have been solved in development, but it never was. Another thing to note is that it didn't take WB Montreal that long to make this game, mostly because they didn't have to design it from scratch. They reused many models and textures for the environments and kept combat and movement the same. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Wrong. The game felt much too similar to Arkham City, even using most of the same game world. WB didn't try to put their own spin on the franchise. Instead, much like Troy Baker's Joker voice, they were doing an impression, but this time of Rocksteady. What they did have to develop on their own was the motivation and morals for a young Bruce Wayne. Very early on, they had to design missions around a younger, reckless Batman that they couldn't quite do with Kevin Conroy's mature, ultra-calculated version of Batman. Examples of this include the GCPD trying to arrest him constantly, people thinking he's a myth or a bat creature, and of course, learning about the Joker for the first time. Eric Holmes was WB Montreal's lead creative director on Arkham Origins. He and his team also made some very fun design choices that fans really enjoyed. In my opinion, they made the best looking Batsuit. They shortened the ears, which made him look a lot more like the New 52 style and a lot less like the long Halloween look that we were used to. They also redesigned the rest of the suit, going for a less manufactured look, more like pieces of gear thrown together that Bruce has either collected or invented. They also took the gray out of the suit, making it look like when Christian Bale spray paints it black in Batman Begins. Another choice in development that I do like, but it does have its problems, is the Christmas time setting. The city is truly beautiful to see, and I always want to play it on Christmas Eve. I like that they were able to create countless parallels in the city design. I love seeing the irony of dark and dangerous Gotham streets contrasted with bright and cheerful holiday decorations. It's kind of funny. It does make for a lovely sight to see, but once again, I have to come back to how bad the performance is. With the possibility of hundreds of tiny light sources being shown at once, the engine is trying to generate accurate shadows and reflections based off of all of these Christmas lights. It created terrible FPS drops anywhere there was a bunch of illumination. Just another reason WB Montreal should not have used Unreal 3. WB also made some very nice changes to how they shoot cutscenes compared to Rocksteady. Aligning with their young urban legend theme, they often angle the camera up at Batman or use his shadow to get an overpowering or menacing look. This can be seen when Batman decides to do his interrogation above a 30-foot Christmas tree.
Where is he? I swear.
Damn.
Wake up.
What happened?
Time to talk. Where's Cobblepot?
Let me go!
If you insist.
Please, Stop! Stop! I'll call him. I'll tell you anything you want to know, please!
Too late. I already have what I need.
No!
This would work out great in their favor and would actually influence the camera work in Rocksteady's next game, Arkham Knight. For the first time in the series, we had a new composer. Christopher Drake replaced Ron Fish and Nick Arundel, who made the music for Asylum and City. Since Arkham Origins is a prequel and set on Christmas Eve, this gave Christopher Drake much more freedom in deciding how to differentiate his style from the previous games. He chose electronic tones, carols, heavy drums, and tried to avoid classic orchestra, which had been affiliated with Batman content in the past. I actually talked to Christopher Drake on Twitter about his inspiration for the soundtrack. He referenced taking cues from 1988's Die Hard, which some call the best Christmas movie ever. Die Hard's soundtrack featured many sleigh bells to highlight important details. Mr. Drake uses this a lot in the song The Night Before Christmas. Parts of the soundtrack were also layered, so WB could pull sections in and out seamlessly while the player moves through different parts of the city, all with their own vibe and musical hints. WB would also have to call up Christopher Drake on the phone and describe the scenes that he would have to design the sound for. And he did a great job for a composer who was not in the Canadian studio with the team. All of this added up to an average game that had more potential than execution and did not do enough to separate itself from its predecessors. Batman Arkham Origins was released on October 25th, 2013 for PC, Xbox 360, and PS3, but they probably should have delayed the PC version. They also released companion games for Nintendo 3DS and an iOS fighting game with the same name. Arkham Origins' release was not as highly praised as other entries in the franchise. Instead of winning many Game of the Year awards like Arkham City, it was getting average reviews, sitting around 74 on Metacritic. With reviewers trashing the lack of innovation and slow story, the game only sold 1 million copies in the first week, nowhere near the last game. A once great name was being dragged through the mud by every credible review site on the internet. So what happened? The reoccurring theme was that it didn't move the series forward in gameplay or story. Some felt it was just a stretched out version of Arkham City. The biggest problem, however, is a boring narrative. You can easily see the quality level drop off when Paul Dini left DC Comics. You might have noticed that I didn't run down the plot in this section of the documentary. That is because it isn't a fun story to tell, and I want you to watch the rest of the video. There's a Joker twist that everyone sees coming, and that's about it. I can tell you everything that happens in Arkham City, point by point, where Batman goes, who he talks to, what he needs. I can tell you how to beat the Mr. Freeze fight, but what I can't tell you is how Arkham Origins connects. How it connects to itself, it barely connects to Arkham Asylum, besides the fact that the Joker is locked up there at the end. But once again, this is 7 years before, so realistically, he just gets out over and over again. Nobody believes the Joker is locked up for 7 years. Here is the entire story of Arkham Origins in 10 words. Beat up 8 assassins and wait for the Joker scenes. It was a poorly put together story, and the main reason it did not sell very many copies. Some think the Joker pretending to be Black Mask was a good ending, but to me it just felt like a reverse of when Clayface was pretending to be the Joker in Arkham City. All in all, Batman Arkham Origins is worth a weekend playthrough in December if you love Batman games, and it might not have deserved the crazy public outcry it received. This marks the first time that the public was not happy with an Arkham game, and it turned many off to the franchise right before the biggest entry yet. In the final part of this documentary, we will discuss how Rocksteady returns with the epic finale, Batman Arkham Knight. The team at Rocksteady had big plans to end their trilogy, and needed 4 years to do so. With WB Montreal filling the gap in time with Arkham Origins, Rocksteady took their time and began planning the ambitious finale, Batman Arkham Knight. Pre-production started in 2011, with full development beginning in 2013. Once again, the original writer for Asylum and City, Paul Dini, did not return, as he moved on to Marvel Comics. By this point, Rocksteady had their own team of storytellers that could create intense moments on par if not better, than Paul Dini. This team included Sefton Hill, Ian Ball, Mark Lancaster, and legendary writer Jeff Johns working as a consultant. Contrasting the Christmas Eve setting of Origins, Arkham Knight is set on Halloween and takes place a year after the events of Arkham City. Batman, played once again by Kevin Conroy, is still dealing with the death of the Joker, and it haunts him because he knows that he could have saved him. Still with traces of the Joker's tainted blood, Batman cannot stop seeing his fallen arch nemesis. He is plagued by hallucinations the entire game. These visions are caused by the Scarecrow's fear toxin, and the story revolves around his plot to release it upon Gotham City, Batman Begins style, causing a panic and a massive evacuation from Gotham.
Tomorrow, this will seem like child's play. Gotham, this is your only warning.
Rocksteady wanted to innovate the open world genre and were not happy to just make an Arkham City clone. They first focused on new gameplay features that they wanted to include and let those ideas dictate the rest of the development. Most notably was the addition of the Batmobile, which they had wanted to include since Arkham Asylum.
What are you doing?
Evening the odds.
This may seem like a small addition, but this would drastically change how Rocksteady developed video games. First, they dropped a prototype Arkham Knight Batmobile into the 2011 game, Batman Arkham City. They immediately were certain that they had to make a much bigger and more detailed Gotham City to accommodate the size and speed of the Batmobile. This old formula of making small, dense environments was not going to work for Arkham Knight. Rocksteady has also been known for designing incredibly realistic environments, but now that they had to make a massive game, they would not even consider suffering quality over quantity. This is one of the main reasons Arkham Knight took so long to make, and most of that comes from the decision to include Batman's infamous car. Streets were wide and everything was connected. It looked more like a Grand Theft Auto game set in Gotham than any of their previous titles. The Batmobile was originally cut from Arkham Asylum and City for various engine-limiting reasons, and members of Rocksteady said that it might feel like a totally different game if they ended up adding it. Honestly, it was different, but in a good way. When you play Batman Arkham Knight, you feel like Bruce Wayne. As cliche as that sounds, you feel like the ultimate Batman, because they did such a good job of adding everything a Dark Knight fan could possibly want.
Talk, or I'll crush every bone in your body.
Okay. She's working out of a penthouse in Chinatown. I swear that's all I know.
If you're lying, I'll break the other one.
The other one? Ah!
For better or for worse, there were now car chases, eccentric Riddler races, and for some reason, tank battles. The developers needed a way for the Arkham Knight to feel like a constant, overwhelming threat like the Joker did. So they decided on making many tedious and often difficult tank engagements. This gameplay mechanic totally changed environmental design. For the first time in an Arkham game, the environment was destructible. No, I do not mean a wall that could be blown up by explosive gel. I am talking full-on storefronts, collapsing when you crash into them. Barriers holding up bridges breaking when you drive through it. This was all possible because Rocksteady finally stopped using the Unreal 3 engine and moved on to Unreal 4, which had a much better physics system. With the game world 5 times bigger than Arkham City, Batman's other movement abilities were upgraded to fit this massive scale. Gotham City is much more spread out and vertical than Arkham City, so Rocksteady made his grapple and gliding distances much farther. A player could get from one side of the map to another by only gliding and basically never using the Batmobile. It was a noticeable difference with how much height and speed that you could actually accumulate while diving and gliding. Once again, all of these design choices came from the addition of the Batmobile. If we want to drive, we need bigger streets. If we have bigger streets, we need taller buildings to grapple onto. If we have taller buildings, we need to glide higher and faster. If we need to glide higher and faster, maybe let's eject out of the Batmobile. Do you guys see how one design choice can alter the final project in many different ways? As much as I enjoyed drifting through the streets of Gotham, the addition of the Bat Tank left me with the same issue I had with the Dark Knight films. If I know one thing is true in this world, it is that Batman does not use guns. He hates them. This is what killed his parents and inspired his redemption, his retribution, his overall hatred for crime in general. Yet so many iterations of this character feature him using guns on motorcycles, cars, and planes. I don't understand how this is any different than Batman walking down Founders Island shooting people with a rocket launcher. Batman does not use guns. Every comic writer in the world knows this and finds ways for Batman to solve problems without weapons, but for whatever reason, TV and video games and movies will make up ridiculous excuses as to why Batman uses a firearm. I don't get it, I don't like it, stop doing it. It almost baffles me how highly paid DC writers will ignore the second rule of Batman. He does not kill, and number 2, he does not use guns. To me, it seems like Rocksteady thought, well, I mean, Christian Bale had guns on the Tumbler in The Dark Knight, and everybody loved that movie, let's just do that too. Arkham Knight's gameplay features 75% Batman stuff and 25% shooting stuff. 25% of the games, you are using guns. To get around this obvious break of Batman lore, they simply write off all of this repetitive gunplay in one line. They are unmanned tanks being controlled remotely. Yes, some of the fights are fun, but I thought it was a strange choice including guns on the Batmobile in Arkham Knight, because it took over way too much of the game and it just felt weird how often I was shooting things as Batman. Besides my problems with Arkham Knight being a bit of a World of Tanks knockoff at times, I loved what it did for the map design. For example, Miagani Island features old Gothic architecture, with Wayne Tower in the middle. 1930s buildings mixed with futuristic technology makes it a bit hard to pinpoint what year this game actually takes place in. Much like the animated series, it has an absolutely timeless look. This seems significantly different to Bleak Island, which is loosely the location of Rocksteady's last game, Batman Arkham City. Also, character design saw a massive improvement during the switch to the Unreal 4 engine. Models like Catwoman look noticeably better in pixel quality than her Arkham City counterpart. Also, the Batsuit, like always, has had a significant upgrade. Bruce's final Arkham suit looks very similar to the Batmobile, featuring many similar shapes and colors. They look like they were both manufactured by Lucius Fox and Wayne Enterprises. The suit is covered in a tri-weave armor plating, much heavier than the cloth suit that is shredded by the end of Arkham City. It makes him look more wise and mature, and showed how much he has grown as a vigilante. In Arkham Knight, we see a much older, darker, and mature Batman, who is taking zero unnecessary risks. He is ready for war. Hopefully you guys can see the evolution of Bruce through the design of the Batsuit. I don't want to spoil the ending of this game because if any of you guys have not played it, I would really recommend you do, so let's move on to the reception. Batman Arkham Knight was praised and loved by many fans of the character as well as enthusiasts of the open world genre, despite its rocky launch and also being buried by The Witcher 3. We can't find the exact sales numbers for Batman Arkham Knight, but what we do know is that it is the third highest selling superhero game of all time, behind Spider-Man and Arkham City. This game had many technical flaws at launch for the consoles as well as still existing problems for modern PC players. But in my opinion, as well as the pocketbooks of Warner Brothers and DC, Arkham Knight was a massive success. The real question is what is next for Rocksteady and Warner Brothers? There are rumors that WB Montreal is working on a sequel to Batman Arkham Origins, another prequel to Arkham Asylum. As for Rocksteady, we know almost nothing. Yes, they are working on a new game, we just have no clue if it is in the Arkhamverse or not. Rocksteady started as a tiny studio in the UK who made a demo for Batman's cape moving in the wind. Now they are a multi-million-dollar AAA developer with fans all over the world begging them for another adventure as our favorite Caped Crusader. So how did the Arkham series rise from nothing to one of the most popular video game franchises of all time? It was the passionate crew at Rocksteady who stayed determined and ever vigilant to deliver the Batman game they wanted to play and knew we would love as well.